So what's the deal with investments? I mean, I feel like this is an area. I'm a person who I invest money. I invest in the stock market. Is that something I should stop doing? Is engaging in investments, especially speculative investments? Is this somehow wrong or against Catholic social teaching?
Yeah, there's nothing unjust about investments, and I think that should be the first thing that we should say is it's nothing unjust about investing your money in the stock market, in property, in gold, or any sort of other financial asset, so long as the financial asset isn't supporting something intrinsically evil. So obviously you can't buy stocks in Planned Parenthood or something like that. But there's nothing unjust about investment. Investment is important because it is actually part of the economic process. We're allocating capital towards certain goods. So, for example, when we're buying a house, obviously there's two aspects of a house. One is obviously the social need that it provides to the person who's going to be living in it, in which case, obviously, there's nothing wrong with buying a house. And then there's obviously the sense of people buying houses as a form of investment. Now, there can be, obviously, again, coming back to fraud, obviously there can be forms where people will unjustly manipulate the market in order to increase the price of things. But strictly speaking, there's nothing unjust about investment. Now, some scholastics say that, well, it's not unjust. It's not morally commendable to just put your money in the stock market in order to seek a profit. They say it's fine, you can do it, but you're not going to get any brownie points for it. And I think that that's probably a fair attitude to have, because in our current individualistic, economically liberal and capitalistic society, where capital seems to be dictating how resources are allocated rather than labor and people being the ones that making the decisions about how resources are allocated. Obviously, things are going to be for the sake of profits. And there's nothing inherently wrong about a business seeking a profit and people wanting to seek a profit of their investments. There's plenty of good quotes from the popes that talk about it. In fact, this book is a really good book if you're just wanting a really small kind of catechism or a very, very small sort of work that kind of has a lot of quote mines from the popes and different magisterial texts about different aspects of the economy. But there's nothing unjust about wanting to invest your money, so long as you're investing it in good ventures, in good enterprises that are going to, support the common good of society. If you're investing in things like Planned Parenthood, then maybe you need to rethink your investment strategy. Or if you're investing in things like, companies that are purposely interfering with the common good, there might be a problem with that. But I guess there's also the other aspect that investment also entitles you to the ownership of that particular company. So you are able to vote when it comes to who is going to be on the board of directors, different policies that company might put in place. So if you think that there is actually some good to a company, but they're doing bad things, there might be a reason that you invest in it in order to try and change the attitudes of that particular company. Now, that's a bit inaccessible to you and me. That might be more accessible to people who have millions of dollars who actually have a sway when it comes to the voting of particular companies. But for people like you and me, I think, who are not billionaires or millionaires, I think the best, well, maybe you're a millionaire, I don't know, but but maybe the best way to look at it is just invest in the things that you think are going to contribute to the common good of society and that aren't going to purposely hinder the common good of society.
So is there forms of investment that are better, like that are more because I personally, I have done, traded on the stock market before, but in the future, I'm probably going to move over to more of the real estate investment sort of line of things. Some people, rather than wanting to invest on the stock market, they want to individually invest in, smaller businesses or ventures. Is there any sort of, better or worse there? Is it, it's all kind of, you're getting a return and, you're getting some sort of ownership, so who cares?
Yeah, well, I think there's probably a few principles you need to put in place when it comes to how you would want to invest your money. So first of all is why are you investing? Obviously, a lot of people invest because they want to secure their what they have, their property. So they say, oh, look, for example, currently with the dollar is undergoing quite a lot of inflation in the US economy. And so they say, well, having my money stuck in just cash in my bank account is actually going to cause a lot of problems, because I'm not going to be able to have the same purchasing power with my money in the bank account as it would if it was actually earning an investment. And some people say, this is my way of being able to provide for my future, to, potentially buy my own house down the track if that's becoming inaccessible in your particular economy, or maybe I'm going to put it into my own venture where I'm going to start my own business. And it may be some people see that it's actually a way of supporting their family. So, for example, people who earn dividends off their shares, they see those dividends as being a form of income to support their family. So obviously, you need to look, first of all, at your own personal obligations. So if you have obligations to a family, then obviously you need to think about, well, what is going to be morally required for me to support my family as, the breadwinner or as the head of my household. I need to think about what's going to be best for my family. The second thing, obviously, is what's going to be best for society. And you got to think, okay, well, how can I invest this in profitable ventures that are going to give me, a maybe slightly risky, but not too risky, it's going to put my family at stake, kind of ventures that are going to support me. So obviously the most safe sort of things are government bonds, more, slightly more risky, but it's pretty safe for index funds. Then more risky is when you're actually trying to bet, or not bet, but like invest in particular stocks to see if they're going to go up or go down. My sort of thought is that you always want to put charity as like the highest virtue when it comes to thinking about how you want to invest your money that's going to contribute to the common good. So my first advice would be that you should look at whether there are local businesses by Catholics that you could start a business together. Or maybe there's a particular entrepreneur, a Catholic entrepreneur, that's saying, hey, look, I think we need more Catholic media organizations because there aren't too many media organizations that are supporting Catholics. In which case you're like, okay, well, let's have a look. Let's do this particular calculations that are necessary in order to see whether this is going to be profitable or not, whether this is going to be successful or not. And once you see that, perhaps there is there is a risk to this, but the risk, it seems quite manageable, and it seems like that there is a pretty good, pretty good sense that there might be a return on this. Then putting your money with this particular venture, giving this money in a joint sort of ownership with like an entrepreneur. Maybe you're the entrepreneur, maybe a friend who's going to be the entrepreneur and is going to be like, I'm going to put this into motion. That's probably the best way, because it helps things like Catholic Action to bring about the social renewal of a particular society. Obviously, I think those are the highest kind of ends that you can put to it, things that are going to, obviously still make a profit, but are going to contribute to the renewal of your society through things like Catholic Action. Things that are less good, things that are still, going to contribute to the common good, but may not be to the particular Catholic ends of the common good, or the Catholic sort of character of the common good. But then, there's obviously a list, things that, that are better, things that, not as good, things that kind of get worse. I think at your first sort of obligations need to be to your family, if you have one, and how you're going to support their welfare, and keeping that in mind. And then if you can, and you think that you can be a little bit risky by, supporting local Catholic entrepreneurs, supporting local businesses that might help with Catholic Action, supporting local businesses that are going to, that are run by Catholics, and, might help employ more Catholics, employ more people who are, looking for jobs. I think these are the best sort of forms of investment that are really, really going to help you feel like you're connected with that business, as opposed to like shares where you're feeling quite detached and maybe you don't really care all that much about the business so long as it's making a profit. I think that those are sort of considerations you should put in place when it comes to how you might want to invest your money, and the best places to invest that money.
So it's a question that I have. Is it immoral to speculate? Because what a lot of people do is, they'll have a stock in which it's very risky stock. They'll invest a certain amount of money. Maybe they'll leverage it, invest on margin, things like this, options, the risky forms that are more speculative in nature. Is there any sort of anything morally problematic about that, or is it just something we shouldn't worry about?
there can be a lot of moral dangers when it comes to speculation. So I think the biggest one is obviously the biggest danger is are you going to actually are you actually going to be able to provide for the subsistence of your family? So everyone has particular moral obligations, not only to their families but also to themselves. Like, if I fail on this, does that mean I'm not going to be able to eat for the next week? If I fail on this sort of form of speculation, does this mean that I'm not going to be able to support my family? Does that mean that my kid's not going to be able to go to school? Does this mean I'm not going to be able to afford healthcare for my kid? These need to be your primary consideration. If the risk is so great that it's putting this sort of stuff in jeopardy, then absolutely no go. Like, you need it. That is completely immoral. You're putting yourself at risk. You're putting your family at risk. You cannot engage in this sort of form of speculation. Now, obviously, using leverage in itself is not immoral. Banks do it all the time. Lots of different institutions illicitly use leverage in order to support the common good. So using leverage itself is not bad. Shorting stocks and stuff like that, this is a kind of form of this is a kind of financial asset in order to basically maybe put pressure against a company that you think is actually not all that successful, in order to try and reallocate capital and reallocate sources to more productive forms that are going to support the economy. And to be fair, a lot of people, and even people like, and again, I'll go back to the Scholastics because they're very, very clear-headed on this. Merkelbach actually addresses speculation in his moral theology textbook, and he actually specifically points out speculation as basically saying that this is a fine. This is not fine, but this is a just thing. It's not unjust to speculate. So long as you're not speculating in such a way as you're putting yourself or your family or those around you at any particular risk. So if you've got, like, say for example, you've got an extra $5,000 or whatever, and this is just money that you've got on the side. It doesn't really matter if you lose it or win it. It has the same sort of moral implication as gambling, really, honestly, because if gambling is fine, according to moral theologians, so long as you're not putting your family at risk by gambling too much, there's nothing wrong with gambling on the stock market, because both basically amount to the same sort of thing. As long as you're following the same sort of moral principles, which is that you're not putting yourself at risk, you're not putting the people that depend upon you at risk, and you're obviously not speculating on things that are themselves immoral. There is nothing wrong with speculation because it amounts to a form of gambling, and it abides by the same sort of principles as gambling.
So you mentioned that, and there's very clear cases of this, that it's impermissible to invest in companies that are fundamentally immoral. But I think that while there are clear cases of this, there are also admittedly very unclear cases of this. Like, we can think, for example, of defense contractors. Technically, there's nothing wrong with the United States military using private companies in order to, fund advancements in weapons of war. That is just for the defense of my nation and other nations as well. But obviously, these defense contractors do very objectionable things. Or you can even think about something like, certain businesses like Walmart, I'm sure, helps fund abortions, or Target, or any of these sorts of companies. So where do we draw the line right there when we have these more gray cases of companies who may actually be involved in immoral activities, although they're not really like fundamentally or necessarily intrinsically immoral?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that what we need to consider is whether the business practice, like the service and goods that it's specifically providing, whether these sort of things are intrinsically evil. So, for example, again, Planned Parenthood. You can't invest in Planned Parenthood. The services and goods that it provides are intrinsically evil, which is abortion. Things where the services and goods that it provides are incidental to the sort of main operations, I think you have to sort of consult your conscience. If your conscience is telling you that you can't engage in good faith in supporting these sort of businesses, because you think that the goods that they provide through their main source is actually outweighed by the evil they do by the things that they put in place. Like, for example, if Walmart is supporting contraceptives and selling contraceptives, if you think that that is outweighs the particular good that it might be doing, then your conscience needs to kind of lead you in that sort of regard. My personal perspective is that defense contractors, yes, they engage in some pretty, they engage in some interesting forms of, they engage in some pretty interesting forms of lobbying, and perhaps it's to their profit. And I'm not going to accuse all defense contractors of doing this, but I'm pretty sure probably most of them engage in this sort of stuff. Obviously, if their profit is war, and that war is unjust, it seems that it's pretty difficult to square that you could be investing in those sort of companies. But I'll just probably note here that this is probably not my area of expertise. I would probably leave this to the moral theologians who have a better understanding of principle of what is it called, the double intention. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
Where but this is probably something to cut out of the video. I don't have the same sort of expertise in this area as I do in others.
Okay, so what is usury?
Yes, usury can be understood in multiple different ways. Usury can be understood in a very, very broad sense, and probably in an improper sense, as being any sort of unjust profit from a contract. And this is probably not a proper use of the term. A lot of people like using usury in this sort of way, but this is probably not a proper and specific use of this term. But specifically, usury is profit that arises from the intrinsic titles of a mutuum contract, which is a loan contract. So, for example, if I was to give you $500, and I was specified that you have to give it back at a certain time, I can only expect to get $500 back. And that any profit above this would be seen as unjust and usurious. And I think it's important that we understand the principles of contracts before we sort of get more into this, which is that in contracts, there needs to be equality. Equality is really, really important. Not just like proportional equality. This is like actual equality. So if we want to see this as like two scales, like the more that one side is weighed down, the more you have to sort of lever the other side. So in a loan, which is a gratuitous contract where you're giving some sort of fungible good, which is it's used in its use, either physically or morally. So for example, food is used up physically, whereas money is used up morally. It's been alienated from you, so you can no longer use it again once it's being used. Unlike, for example, a machine where you can use it multiple times and it's not used up in its use. So in a loan, when you're in a mutuum loan, there needs to be equality. So for example, if I'm giving you 500 barrels of wine, I expect 500 barrels of wine in return. I expect there to be equality in a gratuitous loan. So when it comes to money, which is obviously what we're specifically sort of talking about here, $500, $500. There needs to be equality. Now, this arises from the intrinsic titles of the loan. So what specifically is accounted because of the loan itself. Now, there may be extrinsic elements of a contract that make the weights go off a little bit. For example, if me giving you this loan made me incur a particular damage, which is in Latin called damnum emergens, which is a particular extrinsic title, then for example, then I would say, well, hang on, there's now an inequality in the loan. Me giving you this loan is now meant that I now have to suffer some particular kind of loss. So a good example of this is that if I was to give you $10,000 as a loan for like a period of a year, and within that year, my car broke down, and I don't have access to that $10,000 to go and buy a new car. Instead, I now have to rent a car until I get that money back in which I can buy a car. Well, me having to pay for renting this car is a damage that's incurred to me because of this loan. And so by justice, because I've incurred a damage, I can try to find some sort of equality by saying, well, because I've incurred this damage, you need to pay for my my car that I've rented until I get the money back and I can purchase my own car. And there's a bunch of these other extrinsic titles. Another one is lucrum cessans, which is the ceasing of a profit. And this was a little bit more controversial than damnam emergence, but it was only really controversial because De Soto and Scotus opposed it, and Aquinas seems to oppose it. But if you draw out his principles, especially in the Secunda Secundae, in his question on restitution, I think it's in Article 4, he discusses the fact that if you're on your way to having something, it is valuable in a particular sense. And so it may not be as valuable as if you had the actual thing itself, but if you're on your way to having something, then it's still valuable in a particular way. And so the example that he gives is that if a thief was to steal the seeds within a field, is he liable to restore not only the seeds, but the harvest that could have reasonably been produced by those seeds? And Aquinas says yes. He's not only liable to restore the seeds, but a portion of the harvest that could have been made from those seeds. And the same sort of principle is also applied when it comes to loans. That if I was to use this money and invest in a particular way, I could have expected a particular return on that money. Now, I shouldn't expect to get the entire amount that I would have got on that money, because what is had in potential is not worth as much as was had in actually. And so there needs to be some sort of principle by which, look, I giving you this money has incurred to me a particular damage where I have not been able to profit as I could have if I had not given you this loan. And so, again, this is another extrinsic title where you need to understand equality. Now, whenever there is inequality by which I profit more than I justly have a title to, this is usury. So, for example, in all those cases, if the scales are more in my favor than they are in your favor when it comes to strict equality, then there is usury involved. And so in particular examples, payday loans are obviously a form of usury, because payday loan sharks could not have reasonably expected to make the amount that they're expecting in return on their loan. They're just
credit cards and 30% interest on credit cards doesn't seem to be equal, or what are people the Affirm thing, or getting your Klarna, DoorDash, it's a lot of examples nowadays.
Exactly. So a lot of these different loans now, obviously in the past it was any kind of interest, because there wasn't these financial assets by which people could invest in. So at the time of St. Thomas Aquinas, the only sort of way you could invest is if you put your money into maybe a venture where they had to sail across the seas, and there's quite a lot of risk involved and something like that. And so there wasn't really a sure return on those sort of profits.
You mean there wasn't the S&P 500 in the 13th century?
Yeah. No, that wasn't there, unfortunately. But so at that time there was no interest that could be charged on loans in order to maintain the equality, because there just wasn't the opportunities for lucrum cessans at that time. Nowadays, because financial assets are so much more readily available and people can invest their money much more easily, out of justice, people can charge a small amount of interest on loans. And that might upset a lot of people. And there are a lot of people who claim that lucrum cessans isn't a just title. So, for example, there's a really, really good book. I actually like the book, but the guy is wrong on his view on lucrum cessans. And it's by Dave Hunt, and it was a book called Something for Nothing. And it's a very, very good book on a lot of issues, because it kind of gets to the scholastic sort of idea of what a mutuum loan is, what usury is, but he denies that lucrum cessans is a just title. But if you look at St. Alphonsus Liguori, if you look at Merkelbach, if you look at Billois, if you look at a lot of these different people, all of them defend lucrum cessans. The only people who deny lucrum cessans are De Soto, Scotus, and a few others. But St. Alphonsus Liguori defends lucrum cessans, and he applies a principle that St. Thomas Aquinas has in the question that I mentioned previously on restitution, that if you're on your way to having something, it can be valuable in a particular way. It's not unvaluable. There is some value to being on the way to having something. It's not the same as having the thing, but it is still valuable in a particular way. And lucrum cessans is sort of based on that principle. If you read Alphonsus Liguori, he explicitly mentions it because there is a bit of controversy as to whether St. Thomas Aquinas supports lucrum cessans. Because in his, I think in one of the responses in his article on usury, he seems to deny lucrum cessans as being something that is actually applicable. But a lot of the moral theologians understand that there's these two different kinds of being on the way to having something, in a remote way, in a more proximate way. And Aquinas at least gives lucrum cessans as a proximate sort of on your way to having something, as opposed to like the theoretical could have had something. I think lucrum cessans is a well-defended position within the scholastic tradition. And that is at least why banks can charge some interest on loans. But I guess the moral principles behind that are that it has to be below what they could have reasonably expected to make if they had put that money into an investment. It can't. So, for example, if we say that generally speaking, the amount of money that you'll make back on the stock market is about 7% per year, obviously banks cannot charge more than 7% per year on the loans that they are going to make, on the loans that they give out. So, usury, I guess it's a very misunderstood, very misunderstood sort of principle today, because a lot of people are very, very hard against any kind of interest or any kind of profit on loans. And I definitely understand the impulse from that, because on the intrinsic titles, there shouldn't be any of that. But because intrinsic titles have to adjust to the circumstances of the day, and today there are a lot more avenues in order to profit from lucrum cessans, then this is a just extrinsic title on loans. And that there can be some interest charge on loans due to the justice of making sure that the weights are evenly matched on either side.